Okay, we are live. Welcome back to the People's Basics. Today is Thursday, March 25th, and on the program today, we have another Commoner's Corner segment. We're talking to folks like you, and we want to encourage you all to go into the comment section, into the description section, and sign up today. We want you to book time on our Calendly to have conversations with us as well. With us today, we are going to be talking to a former guest from the Hill of Roses. His name is Isaac, but he goes by most people's name of Mr. Wabbit. With that being said, let's welcome him to the program. Mr. Wabbit, or as I should say in your formal title, Chairman Wabbit, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be able to have you back on the program, Isaac. For those who aren't aware of you because they didn't see that past episode, do you mind just briefly reintroducing yourself to the folks out there, a little bit about what you do, where you're from, and how you politically identify?
So my name is Isaac, or most people know me by Mr. or Chairman Wabbit, or just Wabbit in general. I am a college student. I post on Twitter a lot. I'm from Idaho, born in Oklahoma. I'm just in America, basically.
And
rural guy.
Yeah, and to that last question, how do you politically identify for people out there? I know you've had a little bit of an evolution since we got to the last talk in 2020. How are you politically identifying these days?
So back in 2020, when we first had our discussion, I identified as a social democrat, and now at this March in 2021, I am a communist, or more specifically, an anarchist communist. So pretty much the furthest left you can go. So yeah, I've had quite a bit of an evolution.
So let me kind of clarify some questions there before we kind of go through like the journey of like what caused that evolution. For people who might not like understand those words, could you kind of break down what you mean by that?
Yeah. So when I say communist, a lot of people think like North Korea or like USSR, like authoritarian dictatorship regimes. But then I throw the anarchist descriptor in front of it. And basically that just means that I believe in the true communist society described by Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, which is a stateless, classless, moneyless society where the workers own the means of production. So no government, no money, and no class. Everyone owns the factories and the products that they work and create at. So yeah, that's basically what I mean by anarchist communist, not some dictatorship.
So I think that's some useful clarifications. So, typically one of the questions I ask people on the program is, what do you think is the basic function of government? But given you, as you describe yourself as an anarcho-communist who preaches anti-state and having no state, I'd like to ask you more of a general question of how do you think society should govern? Obviously, even without a state structure, decisions still need to be done. Why do you believe the state structure isn't the right form?
Well, as we've seen throughout the course of history, the state and government in general has often, instead of putting the interests of normal people in first, they put corporations and money interests first. And I will answer the question of what I think the purpose of government should be, is to provide basic needs for the people, which I think is something you could agree with, at least somewhat. Yeah. And if there is a government, if there has to be a government, I think it should be a sort of minarchist approach where the government gives you what you need and then, for lack of a better word, fucks off. And I think, without money, there would be no taxation, which is, of course, a sort of libertarian anarchist perspective. But I'm sort of a believer of something called an open access economy. It was talked about on a TED Talk. I forget who gave it, but it's a super interesting TED Talk, and it pretty much explains a building block of communist theory without ever saying the word communism or any other political buzzword. And it describes it in a way where a lot of people could agree with it. And basically, just an open access economy is where everything is free. You do not pay for anything, and everyone just works to provide a better life for the world or the country or wherever you live. And so if you have any questions about the open access economy, I'd be willing to answer those.
Sure. So I have some clarifications on the base definition of communism. So you gave 3 points: classless, moneyless, stateless.
Mhm.
And so we talked about the stateless aspect. I wanted to talk about the classless aspect. Can you first, before I make an assumption on it, can you define what you mean by classless?
So the class system currently is geared toward making people more higher up in a social setting than another. So say, Jeff Bezos is a higher class than we are because he makes more money. So class is basically a product of money and capital and production power. So in communism, there would be no class because there is no money. Because one cannot have more money than another. One cannot be worth more or be more important than one other person in society.
Okay, so I would like to offer some pushback and hear what you think on that. I think we can all agree that in most structures, there is some form of leadership where there is expertise involved. Could you could agree to that statement, right?
Yeah.
And so in that structure, someone has more authority and more decision because they usually will have more expertise determined by a community. Now,
Yeah.
I am curious why you think that is not a form of class where certain people who have higher skills or a shown version of judgment that more people have valued, that raises them up in society in terms of class, and more people recognize them, and that attention breeds a form of class. And likewise, I have to wonder, similarly with the state concept, one of the foremost principles that I attribute to the state, and we got to talk about yesterday with our previous guest, is the protection of minority groups. Because right now we have, and I'm not saying they do it perfectly, mind you, sometimes it goes the exact opposite way, but the notion is that if you just have no state whatsoever, those with more power, potentially back in the olden days, like men who were just large, muscular people could domineer people because it was just a use of force. And so we have decided to create a state concept to monopolize that force so that not everyone is trying to use it against each other. There is one only authorized place. And so I'd love to hear in your mind, how do you realign society so that you can have a more flat society and you don't need the use of force consolidated in one hand?
Mm-hmm. So currently, this is sort of a agreed upon idea within anarchism and probably a lot of liberal and leftist ideas as well, that the state has a monopoly on violence, and that the arm of the police force and the military are 95% of the violence committed in the country. It has something to do with those two forces. And I may not be describing that perfectly. I'm still sort of new to the whole concept. But the consolidation of power within the police force and military allows the state to oppress minorities and marginalized communities, which is why a lot of people want to abolish police and rebuild it completely, which is something I talked about on Twitter a couple days ago. I talked about abolishing prisons and the police and rebuilding them to be better, because we can't get rid of the racial biases within the prison and police system, because they're built into the DNA of the system. And without getting rid of it completely and rebuilding it from the ground up, we'll never be able to get rid of those. But to speak to your question about how to create a more flat society, if we get rid of money in general, those who have more money have more influence, and in anarchism, it says that you get rid of all unjust or unnecessary hierarchies, not all hierarchies in general. So there will be leadership roles. It just will not be all authority, and there would be more people-oriented decision-making. So, normal people like you and me will be able to make more decisions within government without being, told what to do by the person above us. We will have more say in the matter. And something like that is sort of manifested in like worker co-ops or, direct democracy, things like that. So I think instituting those two things within our economic and political systems will be able to give us a lot more power, and in turn maybe lead to some sort of society that I'm talking about.
Okay. So let me now talk about that third point. So we've now talked classless and stateless. Let's talk moneyless. Right now, you're saying we can prevent these forms of accumulation by trying to move towards a moneyless society. My one pushback is, even before we invented currency, we still had people who were wealthy and we still had people who weren't. Even in a feudalistic society with bartering, these dynamics still occurred. One of the reasons why money was invented is it helps the free moving of goods. It's kind of hard to bring all your goods to the market at one time. It's a lot easier to bring money that can then be exchanged for different services. So I'd love to ask you, why do you think that will change things in the power dynamic? And why do you think it's a positive thing to not have currency?
Well, so the going back to the feudalism argument. So the feudalism argument, there was a class society because they had the wealthy like kings and queens and barons and landowners and things like that. So and maybe they had no money under feudalism. I know they had some sort of currency under feudalism, but in the I believe it was the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels theorized that with one of these elements going away, the next will follow. So without money, you can't have class because the ones with higher money have higher class. So class is gone, and without class, the state cannot hold up the interests of the wealthy. So the state will wither away as well. And why a moneyless society is desirable to me is because through my political journey over the last year or so, a year or two, I have noticed that politicians and government in general normally they're in the pocket of large corporations and they do what's in the interest of themselves and those corporations rather than their constituents. And so I think a society without money will lead to people doing what's best for their community if we put those incentives in place. And I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, and we were going back and forth about the possibility of transitioning to a completely worker-owned economy, with worker co-ops being the largest, sector of our economy. And they were telling me that how you can't do it all top down with just, forcing everyone to do worker co-ops, which I agree with. But I think if we're still in the capitalist system, we can incentivize, larger corporations to transition to worker co-ops by giving them tax breaks. We've noticed if companies can find a way to get out of paying taxes, they will get out of paying taxes. So if we, incentivize tax breaks for these companies in order to let their workers own a piece of the company, I feel like a lot of corporations will do that. And then for the corporations that don't do that, encouraging union membership for their workers, and unionization, and providing UBI and universal healthcare and universal basic services, basically, to give their employees the power to leave and go to a different company where they will own the means of their production. And eventually that will lead to all companies being owned by their employees. And companies that are not owned by their employees will have less employees, and therefore those companies will either fail or transition to worker owned. So okay. Basically, that was a lot to take, but
yeah, there is a lot there. I guess my final question on the clarification around the ideology is, a large aspect of what you're advocating here is a decentralization of power. And what I want to understand is, how do you prevent certain private actors, whether they're corporations or individuals, from trying to take this flattened system and just claim their own form of dominance within it. Because one of the examples of why I feel like a state is necessary is I always go back to the classic water use example. If someone is polluting your waterways and they are just stronger than you, who is going to stand up to them? Are you going to have to rally a coalition of people and form an angry mob and burn the place down? Or do you have a state who is supposed to try and act on your behalf, and you have some, supposed form of representation in a democracy to then give them the right authority to then take action? Like, how in your mindset do you try to address people who are still going to try and use their own use of force as a form of authoritarian control over a community, whether that's corporations polluting or individuals wanting to use violence to pressure people into certain things?
So within the, there is one form of, there's one thing that I can agree with the more authoritarian communists on, which is something called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And it's not a normal dictatorship in the sense that we know it, which is, one person having all the power. But a dictatorship of the proletariat is a group, or not a group, a government made up of by every single person in the country, which makes the decisions and ensures that no one person can rise to power. So if you have every person in the country, on this dictatorship, as you call it, they can all stop that one person from rising to power. And it was created by, I believe it was either Lenin or Marx that theorized it. And basically, it is just a way to prevent oligarchical power by making sure that there is always more people to stop the power than there will be more people to rise to power. It's basically just a rule by authority, but the authority will be the people rather than one person.
Okay. So let me go now to the second part of what I usually want to ask people, which is, now that I understand how you view the role of government and where society should go, I'd love to ask you, where do you think we should be starting right now? What are issues that are pressing to you that you're currently focusing on? Obviously, we're talking a lot of end goals here, but we still have to live in the present and the transitionary stages. What are you focused on that you think others should be aware of?
Well, the whole worker ownership thing that we just talked about, I was talking to someone, I forget what their username was, but they are seemingly very anti-communist or socialist, and the way that I described transitioning to a worker-owned economy, they think could work, because it's not all about having the government take control and forcing these companies to do these things. We just incentivize and, coax them along the way to pretty much either destroying themselves or letting their employees own their work. And any company would rather let their employees own a little bit rather than destroying the entire company, right? But another thing that I'm really focused on is poverty in general and homelessness. Because there's only about 500,000 homeless people in the United States, and there's 17 million open homes with no one living in them. And I actually had thought about a similar idea before Andrew Yang thought about it for New York City, which was, the government buying hotels or motels or rundown casinos and just turning them into affordable housing for the homeless. I had thought about that like 2 weeks before he announced it. And I was like,
it makes sense. We have a lot of stuff that's already built. Some of it's in fine condition and can be retrofitted to new usage, and some of it does need to be repaired. Like that statistic that you threw out, I'm not sure about the exact number, but I do know you're absolutely right in saying that there is more vacant housing than there is homeless population. A large part of it is that we just let these things turn into blight and don't repair them. And I do think the idea of community land trusts, buying these properties up at a cheaper value because they're blighted and then repairing them would go a long way. So I think you're right. And I will also acknowledge, I don't personally identify as a communist, but I will say some of the things that you're talking about, like having worker ownership in the workplace and worker co-ops, I think is a wonderful idea, and we deserve more democracy in the workplace. So we're kind of at the end of our time. So Isaac, I'd love to ask you, do you have any final words that you'd like to share with the audience out there? And also, I'd like to extend the opportunity I give each guest to turn the tables on me if you have any questions for myself.
Yeah, so I do have one question, and I think that is sort of a very important question. The to ask anyone that is a fan of a political icon, I guess. So what is one thing that you are disappointed in Andrew Yang with?
Okay, I'm going to give two, actually. I'm going to give one specific to the New York City race, and I'm going to give one specific to outside of the New York City race. In regards to the New York City race, actually, I'll give you two. One, I did not like how his comments were on BDS. I thought they were extreme. I am not for BDS myself, but I think it is gross to compare it to Nazis. And I am a Jewish American, and I take that position. Two, I did not like that he has come out against taxes on the wealthy, not even as a later step. Like, he has just not said that he's going to do anything on that. He has not spoken on that whatsoever. And I think his funding plan needs to go further than just getting rid of tax exemptions on property. So I think that is another thing that he could be doing better in the New York City race. Outside of that, one of the things that I think he could be doing better in general is I feel like there is not a large effort to try and build out to the grassroots and operationalize. There has been a large siloing of the grassroots network who have been trying to connect with people at Humanity Forward through people like Zach. And I think that there needs to be more effort that he generally takes towards just operations. One of the things that it seems to me like he does is he very often just goes from one project to another before completing the goal that he set for himself. And I'd love to see him focus on actually building up an operation, because right now it feels like we have a lot of eggs in one basket, where if he fails this New York City mayor's race, a lot of momentum could be lost. And that is not a good thing, because we did not build out a grassroots network nationwide to the degree that I think we should. So those are my pieces of criticism for Andrew Yang that I have. Thank you for that question, Isaac. I really appreciated you coming on to the program today to talk. How can people go check you out if they want to hear more from you?
Well, so my Twitter account is just, my username, as you can see on screen, just with the @ in front of it, @Chairman Wabbit. I also have a podcast with Maria Gray. She's a figure in the Yang Gang. She's very controversial, but I like her very much. It's called The Ratio. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Twitter with @TheRatio21. New episodes every Saturday, except this past Saturday. But the next episode we will have with Big Baby Gandhi. I don't know if a lot of you know him. He's a very big defender of Yang in the mayor's race, and he calls out a lot of racist stereotypes against Andrew. So we're having him on this Saturday, and I'm really looking forward to that. So if you guys want to check us out there, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. And what platform did you say again that you're currently hosted on?
So we're on pretty much every podcast platform. So we're on YouTube. You can find the video version of the podcast, and then on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I think SoundCloud as well, and then a few other platforms. I'm working on making like a link tree or a card with all of our links on it.
Yeah, those are.
But yeah, right now we only have one episode on the platforms. I should probably put the other two up. But yeah, we've interviewed Mark Klocko. He's the photographer, and we interviewed the Arkansas Libertarian gubernatorial candidate Ricky Dale Harrington Jr. 2 weeks ago, and that was a super interesting conversation. So if you want to check those out, those are on YouTube. I'm working on getting them on Spotify right now. And I'll make a link tree with all our links on it here soon. So, yeah.
Okay, well, great. I hope people will go check that out. Isaac, it's always a pleasure getting to talk with you. One of the things I could always respect is, there's a lot of similarities even when we talk through our differences. So I really appreciate you coming on. Hope we can talk again soon. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, man.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So that was Isaac. This was another one of our Commoners Corner segments. We want to encourage you all to do the same and sign up yourself. In our description section, we have a Linktree link, which includes a Calendly link for you to sign up to come onto this program yourself and talk about your own politics. With that being said, my friends, I hope you all have a great rest of your day out there. And as always, I hope you stay basic.